They laughed when she stuttered in broken English, even louder when she served their coffee with trembling hands. But when the billionaire stood and asked her to translate one sentence no one else in the room understood, the laughter died. And what she said next shattered everything they thought they knew about the quiet, invisible girl they had mocked for years. Would you stay silent if you knew the truth could destroy everyone around you? Mira wiped the counter for the third time that morning, her hands moving in slow circles even though the surface was already clean. The diner smelled like burnt toast and old coffee, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like trapped flies. She kept her eyes down, the way she always did, because looking up meant catching someone's gaze, and that always led to the same thing. Laughter. Or worse, pity. "Hey, can we get some service over here?" A voice called from booth 7. Myra's stomach tightened. She recognized that voice. It belonged to Derek, a regular who came in with his friends every Thursday. They wore suits that looked expensive and talked loud enough to fill the whole room. Derek always ordered black coffee and never tipped. Mira grabbed the coffee pot and walked over, her shoes squeaking against the linoleum. Her accent had always been thick, no matter how many years she'd been in this country, no matter how many hours she spent practicing English in front of the bathroom mirror. Her tongue stumbled over certain sounds, turned some words into something unrecognizable. She hated it, but she hated the way people reacted to it even more. "See coffee?" she asked, holding up the pot. Derek grinned at his friends. "Yeah, coffee. You know what that is, right? Coffee." He stretched out the word, mocking her. His friends laughed. One of them, a man with slicked back hair, leaned forward. "Where are you even from?" he asked. "You sound like you're trying to speak through a mouthful of marbles." Myra's face burned. She poured the coffee, her hands steady even though her heart was pounding. She'd learned not to respond. Words only made it worse. She turned to leave, but Derek's voice stopped her. Wait. Say something else. Say, "Thank you for your business." He was grinning like it was the funniest thing in the world. Myra's throat closed. She forced the words out, each syllable heavy and wrong. "Thank you, for your business?" The table erupted in laughter. Derek slapped his hand on the table, tears forming in his eyes. "Oh man, that's gold. You hear that? She can't even say, business." Mira walked away before they could see the tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She went back to the counter and gripped the edge, her knuckles white. The shame was a living thing inside her, coiled tight in her chest. She wanted to scream at them, to tell them she wasn't stupid, that she had a degree from a university in her home country, that she'd been a teacher once. But the words wouldn't come. They never did. The bell above the door chimed, and Mira looked up. A man walked in, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a tailored gray suit that looked like it cost more than she made in a year. His hair was silver at the temples, and his eyes were sharp, the kind that seemed to see everything. He moved with the kind of confidence that made the air shift around him. The diner went quiet. Even Derek and his friends stopped laughing. The man walked to the counter and sat down on one of the stools. Myra's hands shook as she grabbed a menu and set it in front of him. "See coffee?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man looked at her, and for a moment, Mira felt exposed, like he could see straight through her. But his expression wasn't mocking. It was curious. "Yes, please," he said. His voice was calm, measured. "Black." Mira poured the coffee, her hands still trembling. She set the cup down carefully, avoiding his gaze. But the man didn't look away. "What's your name?" he asked. Mira hesitated. People didn't usually ask her name. "Mira," she said. "Mira," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "That's a beautiful name." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and stepped back. But the man wasn't done. "Where are you from, Mira?" Her heart sank. Here it was again. The question that always led to the same place. "Eastern Europe," she said quietly. "A small country. You probably not know it." "Try me," the man said. Mira told him, and to her surprise, he nodded. "I've been there," he said. "Beautiful place. The mountains, the rivers. And the language, complex, but elegant." Mira stared at him. No one had ever said that to her before. No one had ever called her language elegant. The man took a sip of his coffee, then set the cup down. He glanced over at Derek's table, where the laughter had started again, quieter now but still cruel. Then he looked back at Mira. "Do you speak your native language fluently?" he asked. "Weiss," Mira said. "Better than English." The man smiled. "But I need your help." Mira blinked. "My help?" The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a piece of paper. It was folded neatly, and when he unfolded it, Mira saw a single sentence written in her language. The handwriting was shaky, the letters uneven, but it was unmistakable. "Can you read this?" the man asked. Mira's breath caught. She stared at the words, her mind racing. It was a sentence she hadn't seen in years, not since she'd left her country. And it wasn't just any sentence. It was a phrase her grandmother used to say, a phrase that carried weight and history and pain. Where did you get this?" Mira asked, her voice trembling. "That's not important right now," the man said. "What does it say?" Mira looked at the paper again. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She didn't understand why this stranger had this sentence, why he needed her to translate it. But something in his gaze told her it mattered. It mattered more than she could possibly know. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Derek's voice cut through the air. "Hey, what's going on over there? You need a translator or something?" He laughed, loud and obnoxious. "Good luck with that one. She can barely speak English." The man's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes darkened. He stood, still holding the paper, and turned to face Derek's table. The diner went silent again. "Actually," the man said, his voice calm but cold, "I do need a translator. And she's the only person in this room who can help me." Derek's grin faltered. "What are you talking about?" The man walked over to the table, the paper still in his hand. He set it down in front of Derek. "Can you read this?" he asked. Derek glanced at the paper, then laughed nervously. "No. What is that, Russian or something?" "It's not Russian," the man said. "And if you can't read it, then you're useless to me." He picked up the paper and walked back to the counter, where Mira was standing frozen. "Mira," the man said, his voice softer now. "Please, what does it say?" Mira looked at the paper again. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold it. The sentence stared back at her, heavy with meaning. She took a breath, then another, and finally she spoke. "It says..." Her voice broke and she had to start again. "It says, the truth is buried with the ones who loved you most." The man's face went pale. He stared at Mira, his jaw tight, his eyes wide. For a moment he looked like he might collapse. Then he grabbed the edge of the counter, steadying himself. "Who told you that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No one," Mira said, confused. It's written here." The man shook his head. Who taught you that phrase? Where did you hear it?" Myra's heart pounded. My grandmother. She used to say it. But I don't understand." The man cut her off. "What was your grandmother's name?" Myra's blood turned to ice. Why do you want to know?" The man's eyes locked onto hers, and in that moment, Mira saw something she hadn't expected. Raw, unfiltered fear. "Because," the man said, his voice shaking, "that phrase was written by my mother. And she's been dead for 30 years. Mira couldn't breathe. The diner around her seemed to fade, the buzzing lights and distant chatter dissolving into static. The man's words echoed in her head, impossible and terrifying. His mother, 30 years dead. But her grandmother had said those words. Mira had heard them countless times as a child, sitting at her grandmother's knee while the old woman braided her hair and whispered stories about the past. "I don't understand," Mira said, her voice shaking. "My grandmother, she died 10 years ago. She never left our country. She couldn't have known your mother." The man's face was white, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a photograph, old and creased, the edges yellowed with age. He set it on the counter in front of Mira. "Is this her?" he asked. Mira looked at the photograph. It was a woman, young and beautiful, with dark hair and eyes that looked familiar. Too familiar. Myra's breath caught. She looked closer and her heart stopped. The woman in the photograph had the same nose as her grandmother, the same curve to her lips. But it wasn't her grandmother. It was someone else. Someone younger. Someone Myra had seen before. In another photograph her grandmother kept hidden in a box under her bed. This is... Myra's voice broke. This is my great-aunt. My grandmother's sister. The man staggered back, gripping the counter for support. His eyes were wild, his breathing rapid. Your great-aunt, he repeated, his voice hollow. Then that means... Myra's mind raced. Her grandmother had never talked about her sister. Not once. Whenever Myra asked, the old woman's face would close off, her eyes distant and cold. All Myra knew was that her great-aunt had disappeared before Myra was born, vanished without a trace during the war. The family never spoke of her. It was as if she had never existed. My mother disappeared during the war, the man said, his voice trembling. She left me with my father and never came back. I was 5 years old. My father told me she was dead, that she'd been killed. But I never believed him. I spent years searching for her, trying to find out what happened. And then 3 months ago I found this. He tapped the paper with the sentence written on it. It was in a safety deposit box my father left me, along with this photograph. And a note that said if I wanted to know the truth, I had to find someone who could translate this phrase. Myra's hands were shaking so hard she had to grip the counter to steady herself. But why? Why would your father do that? The man's face twisted with pain. Because he was a liar. Because he kept her from me my entire life. And because the truth he was hiding, it's worse than I ever imagined. Myra felt like she was drowning. She wanted to run, to get away from this man and his questions and the weight of a past she didn't understand. But she couldn't move. She could only stare at the photograph, at the face of a woman she'd never known but whose blood ran through her veins. What does it mean? Myra asked. The phrase, the truth is buried with the ones who loved you most. What does it mean? The man closed his eyes, his shoulders sagging. It means my mother is dead, and the people who loved her, your grandmother, maybe others, they buried the truth with her. They made sure no one would ever find out what happened. Myra's chest tightened. What truth? What happened to her? The man opened his eyes, and the pain in them was so raw it made Myra's heart ache. I don't know, he said, but I think you do. Or at least your grandmother did. Myra shook her head. No, she never said anything. She never. Myra. The man's voice was gentle now, almost pleading. Please. If there's anything you remember, anything she said, I need to know. I've been searching for 30 years. This is the closest I've ever been. Myra's mind raced, sifting through memories of her grandmother. The old woman had been kind but distant, loving but guarded. She never talked about the war, never talked about the sister who had vanished. But there was one thing. One memory that Myra had almost forgotten. There was a box, Myra said slowly. Under my grandmother's bed. She kept it locked, and she never let me see inside. But once, when I was a child, I found the key. I opened it when she was asleep. The man leaned forward, his eyes intense. What was in it? Letters, Myra said. Old letters, written in my language. And photographs. I didn't understand most of it. I was too young. But I remember one letter. It was different from the others. It was written in another language, one I didn't recognize. And at the bottom, there was a name. A man's name. The man's face went pale. What was the name? Myra closed her eyes, trying to remember. It had been so long, and she'd only seen it for a moment before her grandmother woke and snatched the box away. But the name had stuck with her, strange and unfamiliar. Victor, she said. The name was Victor. The man stumbled back, his hand flying to his mouth. Victor, he whispered. That's my father's name. Myra's blood turned to ice. The room spun around her, and she had to grip the counter to keep from falling. Your father? The man nodded, his face a mask of horror. My father knew. He knew where she was. He knew what happened to her. And he lied to me. For 30 years, he lied. Myra's heart pounded. But if he knew, then why didn't he bring her back? Why didn't he? Because he couldn't, the man said, his voice breaking. Or because he didn't want to. I don't know. But whatever the reason, he made sure no one would ever find out. He buried the truth. Just like the phrase says. Myra's mind reeled. She thought of her grandmother, of the sadness that had always clung to her like a shadow. She thought of the locked box, of the letters and photographs hidden away. And she thought of the woman in the photograph, the great aunt she'd never known, whose disappearance had left a hole in her family that had never been filled. I need to know what was in those letters, the man said, his voice urgent. If your grandmother kept them, then maybe they're still there. Maybe there's something that can tell me what happened. Mira shook her head. My grandmother is dead. The house, it was sold years ago. I don't know what happened to her things. The man's face fell, and for a moment, he looked utterly defeated. But then his expression hardened, and he straightened, his jaw set. Then I'll find another way, he said. I've come this far. I'm not stopping now. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a thick stack of bills. He set them on the counter, far more than the cost of a cup of coffee. Thank you, Mira, he said. You've given me more than you know. He turned to leave, but Myra's voice stopped him. Wait, she said. I want to help. If there's a chance to find out what happened, I want to know too. She was my family. I deserve to know the truth. The man turned back, his eyes searching hers. Then he nodded. All right, but you need to understand, this won't be easy. The truth is going to hurt. And once you know it, you can't unknow it. Mira lifted her chin, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. I don't care. I need to know. The man held out his hand. Then we do this together. Mira took his hand, and in that moment, she felt the weight of the past pressing down on her, heavy and inescapable. But she also felt something else. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Derek and his friends were silent now, watching from their booth. Mira didn't look at them. She didn't care what they thought anymore. For the first time in years, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't just the waitress with the broken accent. She was someone who mattered. Someone who held a piece of a story that could change everything. And as she walked out of the diner with the man, leaving behind the smell of burnt toast and the sound of her own shame, she knew one thing for certain. The truth was coming. And it was going to shatter everything. Some truths are buried so deep that finding them costs more than you ever imagined. But Mira had spent too long being invisible, too long letting the world decide who she was. Now, she was walking toward a past she didn't understand, holding the hand of a man who needed her more than anyone ever had. And whatever they found, whatever horror or heartbreak waited at the end, she knew she would never be the same. Explore more emotional, cinematic stories on Reddit Storyteller. What secret do you think Myra's grandmother was hiding? If this story moved you, like, share and subscribe for more. Thanks for loving Reddit Storyteller.